Newswire, 21st of February 2024, The Maldives' engagement of China and India, rich imperialism versus poor imperialism. The Chinese Vice-Premier Li Guozhong stopped briefly in the Maldives on January 24. While on the layover, he met Moosa Zameer, the foreign minister. After attending the Third South Summit and the Non-Aligned Summit in Uganda from January 19 to 24, the vice-premier was returning home. Following President Moosa's 5-day state visit to China, he promised that the Maldives would sign the Beijing Free Trade Agreement. The Chinese-language paper China has set the stage for investment in South Asia. The 60-year layout of poor imperialism to be resolved was posted on the social media site Battle Intelligence on January 18, 2024, and is far more exciting than the official visits from China. It makes two claims: first, that China is prepared to invest in the Maldives and that India's time there is over. Secondly, this guarantees China's hegemony over politics and the economy, which paves the way for their re-entry into South Asia. China is implying that it wants all of South Asia to launch an India out campaign. In Bangladesh, they have already established themselves. The paper quotes Maldivian President Mohamed Mutsu, who had recently returned from a visit to China, as saying that China is now genuinely looking towards South Asia and that it is time to end poor imperialism. The expression, which is highly Chinese, most likely alludes to India's attempts to provide the Maldives with military hardware and training. According to the paper, President Mutsu ordered a military detachment supporting the Maldivian Defense Force to withdraw within 2 months, or by March 15, on his return from China. The paper distributed by the social media platform Battle Intelligence is predicated on the idea that India, a country that the British colonized for a considerable amount of time, depended on the economic foundation that Britain left behind to project its power and influence throughout South Asia. Unfortunately, this concept is incorrect and is mainly presented to further propaganda. What is the question? It is said that China ought to honor President Mutsu for driving out Indian troops from the Maldives. What is the question? Generous economic generosity? That may be the case, but President Yamin's debt has already increased due to Chinese economic assistance. The Maldives' wishes, such as the currency swap arrangement, which China has not approved, and geopolitics are the reasons behind the continued disputes between the Maldives and China. Overall, though, there has been an excellent political understanding between the leaders of both nations. The title's implied reference to Chinese investment in South Asia has more to do with reunifying the Maldives with China. Ultimately, with 20 agreements signed by both parties during Mutsu's tour to China, the Chinese Foreign Ministry described the Mutsu visit as forging a comprehensive strategic partnership. Battle Intelligence describes the ramifications of this alliance on India as enormous. How, one would wonder? China determines that the degree of support, domestically, must have been affected and believes that the removal of Indian military personnel from the Maldives will increase the campaign pressure that Prime Minister Modi is purportedly subject to. It is a blind assumption that removing military soldiers from the Maldives will somehow impact the level of support that Modi enjoys at home. The Chinese should only regard the false notion that Modi faces campaign pressure as propaganda. The other thing to note is that negotiations are at play here. India is not being kicked out of the Maldives. A withdrawal cannot be made without talks since it needs to be agreed upon by both parties. That was the main idea behind establishing a core group, the second meeting of which took place in early February in New Delhi. The report on the Battle Intelligence website continues, referring to the hegemonic framework that is beginning to face dismemberment about India's help and development grants to South Asian nations. China needs to be continuously reminded that, while India stands out as a friend in need, China's neighborhood policy is to lend money to make nations indebted to them and acquire control of vital infrastructure assets like Hambantota. Therefore, they contend that other South Asian countries, like Nepal, Bangladesh, and Bhutan, will emulate China and Maldivian cooperation, followed by India's withdrawal from the Maldives. That is a code word for China attempting to spread India out efforts over the whole South Asian region. It appears that Bangladesh has already started doing this. China has already achieved significant economic influence over South Asia's nations. Regarding India, the Maldives is momentarily on the other side, but it would be unrealistic to argue that South Asia agrees. The article is part of a propaganda and disinformation operation when it claims that the resulting geopolitical changes could exacerbate divides within India. Moreover, it is argued that India's strong propensity to secede will only grow more robust due to its local solid power. In this scenario, it is predicted that if an election is unsuccessful, a faction of radical populists led by Modi may encounter severe violence. Societal discontent can also be attributed to local independence. One could argue that it's wishful thinking. The world acknowledges the stability of Indian democracy, and even the nation's territorially protective states are adjusting to an intense center pushing for the country's advancement. Others try to sow splits because they are terrified of this fact. The Atlantic Council essay authored by Michael Schumann provides the most excellent summary of this problem. According to Schumann, Modi presented a more inclusive vision at the last G20 meeting, in which the Global South's voice is strengthened and heard in collaboration with the West and its institutions. That might be a more sensible and enticing approach for other developing nation leaders. The Chinese language text concludes that China's geopolitical policy in South Asia benefits from the current Maldives-China alliance. It is predicted that the Maldivian state has a strong chance of staying the course, even at the expense of India's strategic requirements and regardless of the results of the country's general elections. While India and the Maldives may appear to have reached an agreement on the withdrawal of military presence, the article cautions that other means will be used to sever China's relationship with Maldivian power, and even unscrupulous terrorist attacks to prove the importance of India's military presence. The claim that India has produced many agents in South Asia is absurd from China, which has numerous influence brokers in the region. China sees addressing India's potential actions as a critical first step in ending South Asia's poor imperialism. One may wonder what happens to China's rich imperialism, which has caused debt in numerous nations across continents.